Hello, everybody. Welcome to the PodPodGuestGuest. I'm Insuling, and I have a wonderful guest with me today.
I'm Austin Ramsay. I am the creator of Beam Saber, a forged in the dark game about pilots and their powerful war machines.
I love it. Like, you've just described a lot of the things that I like in Fake World, and I'm into it. So let's jump right into this interview because I want to know all about this. Like, I'll start with you though. Like, who are you? Like, where can people find you? Let's get that out in the open now.
Well, as I said, my name's Austin Ramsay. You can find me on Twitter at NotAnIn. That's NOTANINN. I am the primary GM for the You Don't Meet in an Inn podcast, which is a podcast about exploring obscure tabletop role playing games with a rotating cast. I'm also a tabletop role playing game designer. Beam Saber is the game that I'm most well known for, but I've got a couple other games on my itch page, which you can find at austin-ramsay.itch.io. And we're here to talk about Beam Saber, which is currently on Kickstarter until the 1st of April. And you can find that at tinyurl.com/Beam Saber Kickstarter.
Oh yeah, that Kickstarter, that was a kickoff. I did not realize that you had such a following before Milkshake posted about it in a server that we will share, and so I just popped on in and was kind of blown away by what I saw. Like I love this. Like you have artists, you pay your artists, and I always tell our listeners, pay your developers, pay the people who are making these cool games that you're playing. And I love hearing when developers, pay their artists, pay their workers.
Yeah, it's I've been very fortunate both in the attention that my game has gotten from one part was just like frankly the timing, like the early versions of the game that got released to the public were released in 2018, which is kind of a bit of a mech resurgence began with BattleTech for PC by Harebrained Schemes getting released, but there was also a lot of other mech media as well in that general vicinity. Into the Breach, Daemon X Machina. I think, if I'm recalling correctly, Iron Blooded Orphans was finishing up their second season in that period. And that momentum has just carried forth into 2019 with Gundam's 40th anniversary kicking more dust up and MechWarrior 5 coming out.
Oh yeah,
So there's been a lot of attention in the genre that has rolled on to me.
yeah. And if listeners are curious, it is currently 2020, the beginning of the year. So hopefully we're still here in the end of it and going forward, and not having
Yeah.
to not getting to live out the mech dystopias that we all currently enjoy as entertainment.
Yeah, if I ever actually see a mech, I will know that things are real bad in the world.
Oh boy. Yeah, I'm diabetic. So when the zombie craze was hitting and people were genuinely asking me what I would do if zombies had attacked, I was like, I'll die. I'll open doors for you and then I'll die. Turns out the post-apocalypse, not that fun.
Yeah,
But
anyone who's excited for one of those is probably a very able-bodied person.
oh, definitely. Um, so I like to go over this question with everyone, which is like, let's say that I'm new to the game, and I am. I brushed over some of the basics of the rules before we started this, but I'm curious how you would pitch this game to, say, like a group of people who've been, really dug in on another game, or maybe they don't like new games, maybe they do like new games. Let's say you go, you set your book down, you say, hey, I have this game, and somebody's playing on their phone, and they look up from their phone. You have their attention.
Hmm. Well, first thing I try and sell them on is the what the game is narratively, because if they just aren't interested in a game about the connection between people and their vehicles and people and each other, then I don't think they'd be into it. Because although this is a game that is primarily inspired by mecha fiction, um, the rules very pointedly don't use mech in the text. They use vehicle because you can. It's a very flexible system. People have thought about running Fast and the Furious inspired games, or a game where you play an RAF squadron during the Battle of Britain. And people, even in the more traditional setting of Beam Saber with mechs and whatnot, there have been people who have played like just a 18-wheeler, or another person who played a Dodge Charger, or someone else who played a VTOL jet. So there's a lot of versatility in the game for that. So I try and sell them on the narrative side of things, especially since those roll into the rules directly.
Yeah, definitely. So they put their phone down, telling whoever they're talking to that they'll BRB, and they say, "All right, well, I love Johnny Quest. Are you telling me that I could operate a floating eye or a walking eye?"
Yeah, they absolutely could. I'm trying to think if anyone's done that yet. I've run a number of one shots of Beam Saber, and people have come up with some very interesting designs. There's been a like Pegasus with tentacles coming out of the wings. There's been a grayscale Ronald McDonald.
Oh man, I love this. My friends that I used to game with some people in my area, but going outside is terrifying. So I have this tendency to play off the wall characters. Like I'm playing an actual cassowary in another game, a plant person in a different one. Like I don't want to drop game titles here because we're definitely here to talk about you. And but yeah, like let's say they're like, all right, cool. I have an idea. I've had a thing an idea in my pocket that I've wanted to just throw on the table. I even have a mini printed for it. They take out their mini from their pocket, which is questionable because you're not playing a mech game. What is this? And then they say, all right, tell me more about like the game. No, don't like. You say you have like the free rules, and I always like to tell people I'm interviewing that like I don't want you to like reveal all like your proprietary rules or anything like that, because listeners go pay for your materials, please.
Yeah, as Insuling mentioned, if you want to have a look at the rules for yourself, you can find the quick start rules at tinyurl.com/beamsaber. But the way the game works is that you describe what your pilot is doing, whether that's on foot or in a vehicle, and then the GM will tell you what the position and effect are. The position represents how dangerous the action you're taking is, and the effect is how effective it's going to be. So if you are trying to, throw a grenade at a tank and you're on foot, that's probably going to be limited effect, and it's probably going to be in a desperate position because the grenade's not going to be too effective, and that tank, if it gets its sights on you, you are in a bad way.
Well, if Metal Gear Solid taught me anything, I just have to throw a chaff grenade that turns off the turret.
And if you are if you're the one in the tank and then there's this person with a grenade, you're probably in a controlled position because they're not too much of a threat, and you're likely to have great effect because you're going to be doing a lot of harm to them if you get your way. And then between those two extremes are risky position and standard effect. And once those are decided, then the player rolls a number of 6-sided dice equal to what their action rating is in a skill, which is generally between 1 and 4 dice. If they get a 6, then they succeed fully, no consequences. If they get a 4 or 5, then they succeed, but there are also consequences. And if they get a 1 to 3, they fail and they sustain consequences. And those consequences might be that they take harm or damage. It could be that they end up in a worse position. Maybe that Grenadier gets a good hit on your treads, and now your tank is in a risky position instead of a controlled one. Or it might be more narrative, such as enemy reinforcements arrive, or perhaps someone you've been protecting is put into danger. There's a whole lot of different possibilities. And there's an example list in the rule book. If you're not quite sure just to what degree the consequences should be.
Yeah, I liked how you laid it out. It was a lot to take in with just one read, but I tend to read rule books, cover to cover, and then go back and try to absorb the rest of it. But you have good charts. Like if I was playing the game and I was at all familiar with the rules, they're all in one area, so it'd be easy to just flip to it and be like, okay, this is this, excellent, and then proceed. You even list examples of what could happen. I love it. I think it's great. I've never even touched a Blades in the Dark system, and I feel like I could not. I could sit in on a conversation and even have an opinion on the matter. It's pretty great, especially for a free document. Like, listeners, it's pretty great. We don't do mid rolls. Buy his product.
Yeah, having that free document was very important because it's, obviously a way to get people into the game who aren't sure if they want to drop the money on the full version of the rules. But it's also just a thing that people can, like, if you've got, one person who's excited about the game and has purchased it, they can point the quick start guide to their play group and say, here's what I'm thinking that we should play next. What do y'all think about it? And most of what's just left out from the quick start rules is like long-term play things and a lot of directions for the GM, setting stuff.
I've always liked that setting stuff, though. It sounds pretty cool. It's a. Do you want to tell me a little bit about the setting?
Yeah. So Beam Saber was actually written setting agnostic. So there's obviously a couple elements that will probably need to be in your game that are originate in the default setting, but don't need to. The big one being apps and proxies, and augmented reality, because Beam Saber has a a dash of cyberpunk in it.
I mean, you could never go wrong with a dash of cyberpunk.
But yeah, it doesn't need to be set in the default setting. There's fairly extensive setting creation directions in the full rule book for anyone who wants to make their own setting. And so the default setting is about Earth, maybe, which thousands of years ago, humanity left Earth after it was blighted by their own actions. So they fled on massive Exodus ships, pulled together in record time. And some of those ships failed or attacked each other or banded together. And over generations, eventually 5 factions came about. And they had very different ideas about what to do with humanity. There's an empire, there's an oligarchy, there's a democracy, there's a corporatocracy, and there's a theocracy. And so they went to war over the future of humanity, and it's lasted a long time and has encompassed all aspects of everyday life. There's rationing for everyone. There's probably conscription in a lot of places. And of course, all of this doesn't apply if you've got the wealth or connections to just avoid them or manipulate them in your favor.
There's that dash of cyberpunk
Mm-hmm.
as we all look to our own sad world.
Eventually, it was discovered that one of the backwater worlds that no one really had, that none of the big factions had control of, is probably Earth. No one's 100% on it because a lot of records were lost during the Exodus, and a lot of others were damaged, and the world has also just changed in the intervening years. And so, while it's a backwater planet, so no one wants to commit a lot of resources to it, but actually getting a hold of it could be a massive morale boost for the faction who holds the planet. So the war came to this maybe Earth. Certainly the inhabitants called it Earth, but as all the factions know, eventually there's someone who sets up a colony out on a new world and calls it Earth. There's probably a bunch of places called Earth out in the wider galaxy, or New Earth, or some variation thereon. And so the factions just rolled over the local governments because, the local governments, they had the resources of a single planet at best, or a nation, or maybe even just a city, right? I don't really get into the history of the planet and what state it was in when the factions arrived, because that's not the core of the focus of the setting, which is once the rest of the planet has been taken, there is one territory left, and a large island named Izia. And the reason that everyone has come here is because the planet has 6 space towers, or space elevators. And this is the last one that is held by the local inhabitants in the city of Journey City. And the reason these space elevators are so key is because the planet is surrounded by a field of orbital debris, making shuttle re-entry extremely difficult, basically impossible at most times. Occasionally there are gaps which everyone fights over to get their cargo through. But the space elevators are basically it. So each faction has taken one space elevator for themselves to get their supplies ground side, and this is the last one that they want. And if any of the factions have 2 of them more than the others, then that will give them a big advantage logistically for the course of the war. So you play pilots who are either aligned with one of these 5 factions, or you can also play an independent squad. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a local squad. You could be off-worlders. And even if you play for one of the factions, you can still be a local who's signed up with them for whatever reason. And so it's about the conflict over the territory of Izia. That's the default setting.
Yeah, I love it. I like the idea of using space elevators to handle an obviously fictional problem of space debris. Ugh, it's a nightmare. Yeah, listener, space debris is a real thing. Like, Google it. My goodness, Google it. Curse your cell phones and throw them into the oceans, but don't, because that's also terrible for the oceans.
Yeah, I made this setting of things that I thought would be narratively interesting, and then in hindsight, I was kind of like, oh, I sort of just like subconsciously pulled from all the existential threats that have faced my generation as I grew up. Forever war, and climate crisis, and orbital debris fields.
Oh yeah, I mean, Nixon's getting his wish right now. Poor people are starving. We'll never be able to go to the moon again. drugs are on the streets. Thank you, Nixon.
Yeah.
Oof. I like the space elevators though. I've always loved that as a concept, and the idea that like you could even run a mission where or run a game where like, hey, we're all locals, and we know that they're getting here through the space elevators. Like, do we destroy the space elevators and basically segregate ourselves from the rest of space until the debris finally coalesces into a single ring? Are we doing this? Is this what we're are we going to pull the trigger on this? Because everyone's going to be trapped here, and it's going to get real awful because they have all the guns. But I mean, what are their kids going to do?
Yeah, that's an interesting pitch for a campaign idea.
Yeah, like what are they going to do? Bombard the planet that they can't have? They're already doing it, so
Yeah.
we have nothing to lose but our chains. I love games that make me think like that, or not like that, but like I can hear someone give you the pitch, and then immediately I'm like, oh, cool. So like they rolled up, and maybe Earth was going through like frostpunk, and had recovered. Like it's no longer an ice ball, or maybe it still is, and that's why no one's really sure because the continents are all covered in glaciers. But it's still Earth. I love it. I want to play this so bad.
Yeah, and the setting can obviously be modified to suit each playgroup's needs if there's things that they don't care for it about. Like the factions can be swapped out if there's one that you want to create for your own, or if you want to insert squads, NPC squads into the game that you are interested in, if you're interested in having. And it works in reverse as well. The factions and squads listed in the game were designed to be plug and play. So if you are playing Beam Saber in your own setting, and you're like, oh, we need a squadron of fighter jets, but I didn't write one up beforehand. Let's just look at the list. Okay, we'll plug in the Sword Wing. And there we go. We got a squad that is pre-built for our use.
Hey, that's pretty cool. I always try to tell people who look at a big setting, because like there's some big settings for role playing games,
Mm-hmm.
and they feel that crush that, oh man, how am I going to do this correctly? How am I going to like run this game in a way that won't get my players to start correcting me? And I always tell them, hey, just pick what you want, because the setting does not matter unless it matters. You have 5 factions. You don't need to use 5 factions. You can just use 2. It could just be one faction versus another for your game. And if another player says, well, what about these other 3 factions? What about them? We're not using them right now.
Yeah, the actually, since you bring it up, there's, as part of the campaign prep directions, which are in the full rule book, it discusses like the political scale and the physical scale of the game. Like, do you actually want to use all 5 factions? You don't have to. When I ran Beam Saber in a year-long streamed game, which I'm putting out bit by bit as a podcast called Beam Saber the Cenotaph, and it's fully available on YouTube right now. We basically did not use the corporatocracy at all, and we barely used the democracy or oligarchy. It was mostly just focusing on the empire and the theocracy as the 2 key factions in the game. So yeah, you don't have to use them at all, even if they are in the setting, but you don't have to include them in the setting. The campaign scale directions tell you like what it means to have a game where there's fewer factions. Like if you have only 2 factions, then there's a chance that you're going to be creating a very morally black and white setting. But maybe if you're framing it from the view of independence, then it's just going to be 2 different shades of gray. You could even, if you were so inclined, do a game with only a singular faction. which, that would make that black and white morality even clearer, because then you've, got independence versus this massive faction, and that will obviously color things drastically differently.
Yeah, definitely. Man, I hate how much I want to play this now. Stop making things I like. You also keep posting things like other Kickstarters, and I'm like, but I like that too. Stop taking my money. Kickstarter is theft. It's not. It's not though. It's not, listeners. It's not. So I'm curious about this question. Like I love mechs. They're great, and I'm drawn to mech games, and some of them do it well, some of them kind of don't. But I'm curious what it is to you, like in your mind, that makes a game a mech game.
Mechs thematically are about bodies. They are a replacement or a way to act through. They provide a person with the means to act on a scale and with the power that they normally don't have with their, meat body. So what makes the game a mech game is sort of two things. The first is, does the vehicle empower the person behind the controls to do things that they normally wouldn't be able to do? And do they feel more like whole when they're behind the controls a lot of the time? And the second thing is there even with it being an idealized form, is there still a slight degree of remove, so that it's clear that this isn't just like someone who has become giant? Is it like there's a slight clunkiness, a slight delay to the way it handles, that it doesn't quite map one-to-one onto how your human body moves? I would not unreasonably call the Fast and the Furious franchise a mech series. Like, if you want to look at it a bit more abstractly, because of the way that the vehicles in that movie series relate to their drivers.
I wouldn't argue that at all.
Yeah, like Dominic Toretto's famous Dodge Charger is like signifying of him as a character, and you gotta bet that if he could become a car, he would.
Who says he can't?
Hey, the 9th one's not out yet. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a secret Cars sequel.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I've only watched a few of them, but I do in hearing about them, and like I used to think that Fast and the Furious is stupid. It's just a car movie. But then somebody explained it that they're all superheroes in cars. I'm like, okay, I'm on board with this. I want to watch this now. I want to watch all of them. Just burn.
Yeah, they're not like they're never gonna win an Oscar, but they're a lot of fun, and yeah, actually, I don't think I have much more to say than they're a lot of fun.
That's all you really need, though. Like if I play a game and I'm like, this is kind of dumb, and I'm loving this, then it's mission accomplished. We did it. We're having fun.
Yeah, be on your bullshit.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I get so mad when I sit down at a table and come up with like a fun concept, and everyone's like, "Oh, I don't know. It doesn't really fit the theme of our game." And I'm like, "Well, what's the theme of your game?" And they're like, "Basically what you just said." Oh, come on.
Yeah, misaligned expectations are a rough thing to run into in your game, which is part of the reason that Beam Saber explicitly has a session 0 incorporated in it, where you have to talk about what everyone wants from the game, as well as the lines and veils for the game.
Yeah, I have a horror story about that in my pocket, about Mutants and Masterminds game a friend of mine was running. I won't tell the whole story, but the abridged version is we asked him for tone, and he didn't give us tone, and so he just started reading off tropes from TV tropes. And we kept telling him that's not what we need. Like, is this X-Men themed? Is this Punisher themed? Like, what's the tone you're looking for? And he wouldn't share it, and so I couldn't make a character because he wouldn't tell me about my character's past because he said he didn't want to ruin it. He didn't want to ruin the prologue. I'm like, but I need to make a character. Please help me.
Yeah, that sounds like someone who wanted to write a novel.
Yeah, he does that. It's all right though. He's a great storyteller, but not a great game master. It's one of those things. It's all right. We've talked to him about it. He's probably never going to listen to this. It's he's in my past. It sucks too because we were friends for 13 years. We were friends, and then it just kind of came to a head, and I was like, I can't hang around with you anymore. Like, my dude.
Yeah, life and people change.
Yeah. Well, actually, I told him that I was upset with how he was running it, and then he ghosted me. So I was like, all right, we're in our 30s. We're in our 30s. We don't. Come on, man. Come on.
Yeah.
But oh well. Like, I'll talk to him again if he ever reaches out. It's fine. He's not a bad guy. And I refer to him as ex-friend online just because I'm like, no, I'm not being petty. I just don't want to call him out by name because I still respect the guy. He's a good guy. He's just things got bad. Listeners, everybody at your table is an adult, even if you're not adults. Everyone's an adult. Talk to each other.
Absolutely, and remember that the number one rule of taking care of yourself at a table is that no gaming is better than bad gaming.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody has a problem with your game, listen to them. Hear them out.
Yes.
It takes a lot to go to somebody and say, "I'm upset." So hear them out.
Yeah, that's another thing that was very important to me when making Beam Saber is that there's as part of the rules, there's end of session questions, and those are one part planning for the next session because you ask questions about like what the players or characters players and or characters want to do for their next mission, with some very specific questions about like, are you taking a resource or are you destroying something? Is there a specific group you want to attack? Is there a specific area you want to attack? And similar questions. It's also one part debriefing because I think it's important to have the ritual at the end of a session as people emotionally and mentally transition from the mind state that they were in while playing the game back into the mind state that they need to be in for the real world. Because bleed is a real thing, and different people get different amounts of emotional bleed from their characters into themselves. And so a debriefing as ritual can help to soften that bleed when it occurs, get those bandages on there. And then the last thing is that the end of session questions are also one part check-in, because the back half of the questions are explicitly about like, how is everyone doing emotionally? What are things that you did like about the session? What are things that you didn't like? What would you like to see more of? What would you like to see less of going forward? Because you got to keep that open dialogue with your players and know what exactly they want from the game and what exactly you want from the game as well. Assuming that the you in this question is the GM, but it's also important for the players to know where everyone at the table is at.
Mm-hmm. I get that a lot. Like that bleed that I spent a long time in a pretty toxic group too, when you get a lot of people who make characters who are able to kill the other player's characters for when they backstab you. And I feel like a lot of that was because we didn't have this idea of ending the session and being able to look and say, "Hey, Frank, cut it out." I was upset that you took our GM into the other room for an hour and talked to him, and then did not share any of the information you apparently learned. Let's not do that next time.
Yeah.
Like that's a real world example of how something like this is a really good idea.
I'm not a fan of PvP in tabletop role playing games unless everyone is like explicitly there for it. And then in those cases, I think that the game should be designed around the PvP element, not just like, oh, that can also happen because the game is simulationist. So there's explicit, like Beam Saber and Forged in the Dark in general. The rules are designed to be quote unquote PvE, right? It's all about your conflict with NPC characters and objects and obstacles. But should a confrontation arise amongst the players, there's explicit directions on what to do if that happens. And the first thing that you do is you stop the game, no one touches their dice, everyone takes a breather, and then you talk about what is happening, why it is happening. Is this like any sort of like away from out of character conflict that is finding its way in character? And you discuss like what the goals are of the characters in this scene, what they want, what the possible outcomes are, what the stakes are, what the possible consequences are. And before any dice are rolled, everyone at the table or everyone involved in the conflict has to agree that this is how the dice will resolve things. So that if the dice, come up in a way that they don't want, then they have to abide by them. And if they don't, then they're clearly a bad actor at your table and either need to be talked to or need to be removed.
Man, it like you're solving for Goblin Brain. That need to immediately solve a problem or get the reward. There's a guard at the door and we need to get inside, so obviously we need to kill the guard to get inside. And and since since you're playing a game where you, the player, are free of any kind of repercussions, you go ahead with it. And if you get caught, what's the GM gonna do? Throw me in prison and have this be jail simulator? I'll just make a new character. It's fine. But actually having it in the rules of like, no, stop the game, stop what you're doing. Let's talk this over and figure out why this is happening. Are you shooting the other player's character because you're just not getting your way? And you're just doing that because, like, that has repercussions. They're not going to appreciate it. And the other player could then say, yeah, you're right, I, the player, am not going to appreciate this. And I know you're role-playing your character, but players are responsible for their character's actions. You're doing this. You're making the decision. You're pulling the trigger on this. Is this something you want to do?
Absolutely, yeah. This is what my character would want to do is the defense of a coward who won't face up to the fact that they are responsible for their character at all times and can change what their character would want to do, like on a whim. There's no reason that character couldn't have a moment of revelation before they act and change their mind, or have built up trust with their fellow character PCs, right?
Definitely. Oh my gosh, I heard that so many times. I actually had that come up in a game where somebody, my character had captured an enemy and nursed her back to health, because it turns out that getting reliable information, the easiest way to do that is to give someone a hot meal and let them ruminate on their situation and not, torture them.
Mm-hmm.
And then two other players came in. They're like, well, we're just gonna mess with them. And then the NPC talked back to them, and so one of them was like, well, I'm just gonna cause a little bit of damage with my mech weapon. So we're like, oh, you killed her? Well, I mean, I didn't kill her. We're like, no, dude, come on, don't gaslight us. Come on, it's fine. It's fine. There's definitely no bleed from that.
Yeah, I mean, even on like in that example, like the thing is, it's okay to play a bad person at the table. There's nothing saying that you can't play a bad person. There's just two things that you have to be conscientious of. The first being like, is everyone else at the table okay with the sorts of things that they do? First off, and like, if they're not okay with everything they do, then are they okay at least with like some of the things that describe how they're a bad person? You know, maybe you make a character who is, vicious and will torture NPCs, and everyone's okay with that. But they aren't okay if that same character is racist or is sexually harassing other characters. The second thing to playing a bad character is to know that they are a bad person, right? Like, I have been at the table with people who played characters that were not good people, and they never the characters never did anything that like crossed a line or a veil with the players at the table, but the unwillingness of the player to understand why their character was a bad person like still soured the character to a degree. And I've also been at the table where people understood that their character was a bad person and had a wild amount of fun with that character because they were so awful. And it can, it can be fun to have a villain, in a sense, inside of the party.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways that you can play a bad person at the table and still have it be a successful character. That you shouldn't have to resort to that this is what my character would do defense. If you reach that point where that's your like only leg to stand on, then something has gone wrong.
Yeah, like it's like if a player spends all week looking forward to like a cool conversation that they're gonna have at a party, and then you get to the party, and then one of the players is just like, "Well, I'm gonna throw my drink in someone's face." It's like, all right, well, why? What are you gaining from this? Well, it's what my character would do. He's a rude person. It's like, okay, but you've ruined the scene. You've poisoned the well.
Mm-hmm.
My character is mad at your character, and I am now mad at you.
Yeah, and like that exact same example could still work if everyone was like on board with it and cool with the outcomes that are a result from that. Like maybe you get excited about the possibility of trying to smooth things over or get interested in the conflict that has just popped up between the two characters.
Mm-hmm. I see it a lot too when someone's like, "Well, I don't have charm. I don't have the charm skill, but I have the intimidate skill, so I'm just going to keep using that." And they're like, "No, stop, stop it."
That's actually something that Beam Saber gets around a bit. Is that if you have so if you don't have any points in a skill, you roll 2d6 and you take the lower result, which obviously makes it pretty challenging to get things done. However, everyone can push themselves by spending the resource called stress if they're a pilot, or the resource called quirks if they're in their vehicle. And that will give you +1 die or an extra effect. And so if you take that +1 die, that'll take you up to 1 die. And since a 4, 5, or 6 is success, even if 4 and 5 are with consequences, that means that everyone can basically always get a 50-50 chance of success. And then on top of that, it's very easy for your fellow squad mates to assist you using that assist mechanic, where they spend their own stress to give you more dice. So, for the low cost of 3 stress spread across 2 characters, then you can have 2 dice when you started with 0.
Oh, I like that. That's like a nice simple teamwork system too. Like, I'm going to help them, and I'm going to use my stress to do it.
Yeah, it's a little it's a little more complex than just that, because a key part of Beam Saber is the cut loose connection assist loop, because you spend stress and you push yourself during a mission, and if you spend all of your stress, then bad things happen during the mission to your character.
Okay.
But once the mission finishes, then you enter the downtime phase of play, which is about like the things your pilots do between missions, repairing your vehicles, getting healed for harm, de-stressing, pursuing their own goals, researching topics, that sort of thing. And one of the key things you do during downtime, removing stress, is handled with the cut loose action. And what that is that you pick another pilot that you want to have a cut loose scene with. It has to be one of the other players. And the two of you describe a scene about the player who's acting de-stressing. It might be that you get drinks together, or maybe you silently repair your vehicle side by side in a very friendly, we can enjoy the silence together sort of way. Or maybe you spend the scene tearing a strip off of the other pilot for their actions during the mission. Whatever would remove the burden of stress from your character.
Mm-hmm.
And then once that's done, you roll a number of dice equal to your number of connections with that pilot, the one you've done the scene with, and you heal that much stress. If you roll over the amount of stress you have, then bad things happen. But after you've healed that stress, then you gain an additional connection with that pilot as your bond with them grows and you understand them more. And you also write a belief that you have about that pilot, because you have a number of beliefs equal to the amount of connection that you have with the other pilot. And those beliefs are like gut instincts or thoughts that your character has about the other pilot. And if they cause you to struggle during a session, then you get XP from them.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And so your connection strengthens with the other pilot when you cut loose with them. And then when you're next on a mission and you assist them, it is going to cost you more stress because you are more emotionally invested in the other pilot, but you also try harder to help them. So when you assist, you spend stress equal to the number of connections / beliefs you have with the other pilot, and you also provide them the same number of benefits. So if you just met the person and you have one belief with them, then it costs you 1 stress and you can give them 1 benefit. But if you're really invested in their well-being, you spend 3 stress and you give them 3 benefits. And then, of course, that stress expenditure means that you're going to have to cut loose again later on, and thus the cut loose connection assist loop.
Yeah, it sounds like we're getting a little bit into the question of what does the play style or the play cycle look like, and that definitely seems like one part of it. Of get to know each other, deal with stress, get stressed out again because your friend is in trouble.
Yeah, the game cycles between missions where you're off trying to achieve objectives for yourselves or for an employer against a target, and you're probably going to have your vehicles, but also the vehicles are not necessary to bring along for every mission, or they might not be suitable. I have run at least one session where the vehicles just did not come up in the mission at all because the whole thing was sort of a covert op taking place in an office building, and the vehicles were always an option to be called upon, but none of the players ended up using them because they wanted to keep things quiet. And if I recall correctly, part of the reason that they wanted to do a mission that was entirely out of vehicle was because their vehicles were really busted up and they still needed another downtime phase along with the resources from a mission to finish fixing them.
Oh, that's funny. We can't play our mech game yet because We broke them, but the only way to get the money,
Yep.
the only way to get the resources to fix them is to do something for someone. All right,
Mm-hmm.
what do you say we all try to do some covert ops? Those don't use mechs.
Yeah, so you do the mission, and then you get your rewards for it and the fallout from it, because bad, like, there are consequences to completing a mission,
Mhm.
both good and bad. And then you do downtime, which is, like I said, when you do your repairs and healing and so forth. And then once that's done, you um, go back to the mission, the next mission. But there's also free play scenes that can take place um, between missions, whether that's before, during, or after downtime has been done. And that free play is just like, hey, there's no like mechanical effect to this, but I'd like to have a scene where I go and like visit my character wants to go and visit her girlfriend, and so we're gonna have that. I want to have that scene together where we like talk about what's going on, or you say, I need to go and talk to our direct superior about something. So you can just have these scenes, and sometimes they will like slide into becoming like mechanically relevant. Like, oh, talking to my superior, this I hadn't intended it to be this, but the way this conversation is going, I think this is going to be part of my long-term project to improve my rank in the military.
Oh yeah,
So
or like your sister even like, hey, yeah, I'm calling my sister, and your sister talks about how like, yeah, there's these new characters who showed up, and it basically outs enemy troop movements in the area.
yeah, that's actually a good fun thing to bring up, is that NPC squads, they have their own goals which they pursue between missions. Um, and there's directions for the GM about how to do that. They're pretty simple. It's mostly just rolling a few dice and filling out a clock, and then once they reach a certain threshold before completing the clock, you're supposed to provide rumors to the players about like hints of what that goal might be. So yeah, getting a phone call, or you're calling your sister and her bringing up troop movements. That's an excellent way of representing, of letting the players know about progression on these goals.
It just all sounds so good.
Also, I don't know if we've talked about them yet, and I just sort of dropped the term clocks.
Mhm.
So, for your listeners who aren't familiar with Forged in the Dark games, um, and I think also there's a number of PBTA games that use them as well. A clock is just a measure weight, like a progress bar that is used to measure progress on something that is happening. So, for example, the connections that pilots have between each other is a 4 tick clock, and that means that each time something happens related to the clock, you add another tick, and then when it fills, something happens. In the case of the connection clock, you add a tick when you have a cut loose scene with them, and then when it fills, you get to ask the other pilot a question about one of your beliefs, and they have to answer it truthfully. And then you reset to 1 tick in the case of the connection clock. But other clocks have different things that happen.
Yeah, clocks seem like an interesting mechanic, and I like them, but I need to see them in practice in order to really get my head around like how the flow of it works before I wanted to pick this up and try to run it myself. I think I get it. Like basically, like whenever somebody messes up, the clock ticks, and like do do people like take damage as a direct result of a thing, or is it generally like an enemy arrives? There's a 4 count clock. When that count goes to 0, the attack happens and you take damage. Is that kind of how it goes?
Well, it could actually be anything, because there's two types of clocks. There's progress clocks, which represent like the the PCs working towards a goal, and when it fills, then it's completed. And note that clocks should be used in two instances. The first is when it is narratively interesting for this narrative beat to be dragged out, like it's not necessarily interesting to have a 4-tick clock for picking the lock on a door unless it's dramatic to have that drawn out, right? Like
Yeah.
doing it to get into an apartment, you probably don't need a 4-tick clock, but doing it to get into a bank vault, you probably need a clock. The other type of clock, to finish that thought, the other reason to use a clock is because it shouldn't be something that can be completed in a single roll, or is unlikely to be completed in a single roll. For instance, picking a simple door, that can probably just be done with one roll, but getting through that bank vault door, that probably will require a couple different tries, as there's the various barriers built into it. And there's two types of clocks. There's the progress clocks, as I said, and then there's threat clocks, which represent like bad things happen once it fills up. Like you use the example of reinforcements arriving or of an attack occurring. And the good thing about clocks is that they can be used for anything. So you could use the same 4, 6, 8, 12 tick clocks for either of those things. So once that 4-tick threat clock fills, you could say that an attack or enemy reinforcements arrives, and you should as that clock is building narrativize what that looks like the enemy makes a call for reinforcements. You can see them on the horizon. They're getting closer, and now they are here. That the clock is filled. Or if you're talking about an attack, maybe it's like some sort of massive energy weapon that has to draw power into itself while the battle is happening. And then once it fills, then you deal a lot of damage to, maybe all of the players.
And damage and stress are different, right?
Yes. There's sort of 4 resources in a sense that players have access to spend in a way. For their pilots, there's stress and harm, and then for their vehicles, the equivalents there are quirks and damage. And so harm and damage, they are the things that result from taking consequences of failed rolls potentially, and they basically give you debuffs of less effect, or you roll fewer dice, or maybe you can't act at all unless someone assists you, or you push yourself if it's bad enough, or maybe you just die, or your vehicle is just destroyed.
Maybe you just die.
Yeah. I mean, if you are trying to make a jump between 2 skyscrapers as a person and you fail the roll, it could happen, right? Like maybe you just hit the ground not running.
Maybe with that attitude.
Yeah, well, that one of the things that's great about Forge in the Dark games, and Beam Saber included, of course, is that there's the resist mechanic, where if a consequence happens and you don't like it, you can say, no, that doesn't happen. Here's why, and then you spend stress or quirks as appropriate, and you negate or reduce that consequence. So in that skyscraper example, you jump across, you fail the roll, and you say, well, I don't actually hit the ground and die. What happens is that I slam into the windows like a couple floors down from the roof, and so I'm going to spend stress, and so I don't die, and instead and then the GM probably say, well, that still sounds like it would hurt. So you're gonna, instead of taking the level 4 harm splattered, you're going to take the level 2 harm lacerated as you crash through this glass window.
Oh yeah, listeners, don't ever try to break through a glass window with yourself. Oof.
Yeah.
If you ever break a car door to get out of a lake or something, close your eyes because glass sucks.
Yeah. Um, but also harm and damage doesn't have to necessarily be physical. You could have the, level 2 harm terrified, or the level 1 harm alone. They can be emotional or social. Um, you know, there's a bunch of different ways that harm can be expressed. It's just an ongoing issue that is affecting your pilot or vehicle, that is hindering their actions.
That's awesome.
An important thing about Beam Saber, also, I meant to mention this earlier when you brought up the example of killing a guard to get through a door, is that along with, and this applies to the clock system as well, is that obstacles don't have to uh, be overcome with quote unquote traditional means, right? Like with that guard situation, you of course could just kill the guard, but there's so many other actions you could use. Like, you could persuade the guard, or you could intimidate them, or other things. And if there's a progress clock for defeating an enemy squadron of mechs, and once it fills, then they're no longer a threat. Then sure, yeah, you could roll battle to take it to them in your vehicle and mess them up, but you might also roll sway and try and convince them that this is a losing fight, or this fight is not moral. What are you doing here? You should just leave. And both of those will also fill the clock of progress.
Oh, that's great. I also liked a note that you put in when you're describing the clocks, and how when you name a clock, you don't name it as we have to get past this, or we don't have to fight past this guard. It's there are guards. And so you deal with the fact that there are guards. You don't take the clock down of beating up the guard.
Yeah, you name the obstacle instead of the method, because the method for getting through things is in the hands of the players.
Mm-hmm. And it's all a conversation. Because it is. You're telling a story. I get so upset when I hear GMs be like, I have to challenge my players. I have to do these things to challenge my players. One of my players made the best swords person in the world, and now I have to make somebody that challenges them. And I'm like, no, just let him be the best swords person in the world. It's fine.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing to do, but I think that's also something that players often do subconsciously, is they flag things that they're interested in by the choices they make with their characters. Mm-hmm. So in that example, a player who has made an incredibly skilled swordsman, talk to them and say, do you just want to be the baddest ass around, or do you want to have master swordsmen come and find you and challenge you to prove that no, they are the baddest ass around? Do you want to have someone come and defeat you potentially and then leave you alive, so that they become a goal for you? There's a lot of different ways to face the things that the players indicate with the choices they make.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, yeah, you're all telling a story. It's okay it's okay as a GM to have that conversation with players. Don't try to reveal anything. I hate reveals in games. They could be interesting, but man, don't sacrifice fun for the reveal.
Yeah, that's one of the questions in the Beam Saber session 0 instructions, is to ask the players if they are interested in as players having information that their characters wouldn't have access to. Mm-hmm. Because some people, and this may even vary within a single group of players, some people will want to know the secrets that are coming so that they can play with dramatic irony, whereas others, they don't want to know. They want to be surprised, or they want to some of them just want to be surprised.
Yeah, bringing up X-Friend again. The guy would try so hard, and again, good guy, good story writer, but he would try so hard to figure out what we wanted instead of just asking us. And so
Mm-hmm.
when the big reveal came and he's like, haha, here's the thing, a lot of times I'd just be like, okay. Like
Yep.
I saw this coming. I'm sorry, man. I know you thought that this was gonna be a big thing, but I know your tropes. I've been gaming with you for, 13 years. This isn't a reveal anymore, and I'm kind of not into this. I'm sorry.
It happens.
Yeah. Um, I also like to ask this question a lot because I think it's important for players and developers to be aware of accidentally pushing players away. I always bring up Killer Bunnies because I this happened with it where we got the game and then one of our friends is Jewish and Killer Bunnies calls the currency Kabbalah dollars and they're just like, no,
Mm,
hard no, I'm not playing this game. This game is leading with a Jewish joke and I'm not into it. And like I wonder if the developer of that game, I really want them to find these podcasts to just so that I can lightly shame them and then maybe get them to re-release it with an I'm sorry or something, like,
mm-hmm.
because like they already use carrots, but you can call it cabbage dollars. I think there's
Yeah.
even cabbage on the money. Actually, a cabbage might be another resource. I don't care. It's not okay to call it Kabbalah dollar.
Yeah.
So, like, does your game have anything similar? Like, I know the Roma people are often put into positions of prominence in these games in less than flattering lights.
Well, I have actively tried to avoid including any bigotry in the game of any sort. And I have plans to have a sensitivity consultant regarding disability read through the game. And I have made missteps. One of the squads for a while, one of the squad playbook types, was named a term that I had only ever heard it in reference to like CIA spy types.
Oh, yep.
But
I know
you
that
know,
term.
yeah, because I didn't grow up in the South. I'm from Toronto, Canada, and it was in there for a couple of versions before finally someone pointed out like, hey, this is a like a term, like a not nice term used for black folks in the South. And I was like, oh damn, I did not know that.
Here, let me.
Um,
I'll type it and see if I get the word right.
yeah, yep, that's correct.
Yep.
Yeah, it so I quickly removed that from the game, changed it to something else, and like I'm lucky both that like the community that has grown up around Beam Saber has felt safe enough to bring those concerns to me, and also that someone was willing to do so. Like I would be mortified if that mistake had gone to print,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
instead of just being in the test document for like a couple months.
Oh yeah. I'll tell listeners if somebody's being kind of casually racist, like let them know, and then when they double down, I'm not responsible for whatever you do. It's fine. But like I oh God, I had so much of that when I was growing up because people don't know. It becomes just a common saying, and then you say something, and someone finally is like, "Hey, don't do that."
Yeah, we live in a society, and we get ingrained with things that we'd rather not have,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to make the active effort to remove those words from our vocabulary, right? Like uh when I went to teachers college, there was a word that started with R that I had to actively, like, consciously remove from my vocabulary and use.
Yep.
And I'm glad to have done it, but it is something we have to consciously make an active effort to do, to be better people.
Mm-hmm.
especially when we come from places of privilege, whether that's, bodily or racially or in terms of gender or sexual identity.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
be a better person.
be better. Like,
Yeah,
I
even like in every day, try and be better.
I remember when Old Spice had their commercial of like, "Men, come on, we can be better," and then the response was, "Well, not all men."
God.
All right, so I joked about it before. Like, instead of doing like a mid roll, we're about to wrap up, but instead of doing mid rolls, I tell people like buy the game. Um, you know, it's on Kickstarter now. It should still be on Kickstarter for a little bit once we get the episode up. Um, I've already backed it. I won't say the level I've backed it because I don't like to pressure people. But
Oh, yeah, actually, on that note, if people are like concerned about whether or not they can afford to back the project, because as it stands, I know that there's people have come forward that the shipping is too high with the game to get the print version, and that is something I'm actively investigating to improve for international shipper. For anyone outside of the U.S., including myself, shipping is high, but I'm investigating to make that more amenable to people. And even if that's like too much, or even if just the PDF cost is too high for you, there is a tier that is specifically for people who are in financial difficulties. That is a reduced cost. So don't, if you like want to support the project and can't afford the like full price PDF, don't hesitate to back at the discounted price. It's there for those who need it.
yeah, that money is. I mean, you made it pretty clear. Like you drew some lines about that's not how I want to say. You didn't draw lines in the sand here. You made your stretch goals known. Like, hey, at this level, we're paying our artists. At this level, we're doing this. At this level, you're doing that. And I
Yeah,
appreciate
to be clear, everyone is getting paid with like the meeting of the stretch goal. I'm paying the artists and the editors and the writers exact like what they asked for, and those in similar roles are getting paid the same amount. Um, but the as you said, the stretch goals are all about paying people more.
Yeah.
So like the first stretch goal is I get paid because I'm not getting paid in the base fulfillment, the base funding goal, and then the one after that increases the payment that the contributors are getting by 50%, and the one after that increases my pay by 25%, and then the one after that is the contributors get an additional 50%, and it just sort of alternates back and forth for about 5 stretch goals.
Mm-hmm.
And if we manage to hit that 5th stretch goal, which is like $110,000, then I'll probably start looking at like other things. I don't know. I don't know what I'll do if we manage to get that high, other than be amazed.
Maybe we'll get no.
Maybe I'll put in like a couple of the I'll put in a stretch goal for adding some of the prototype playbooks, because I have a Patreon where I talk about my game design and the progress that is going on with the game up to this point, like the work in progress for art assets. And so one of the things that's on the Patreon is prototype playbooks. These are playbooks that are for Beam Saber, and they're kind of weird. Which is why they're not in the core rules, because they do strange things with the rules.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, there's the artificial, who is like a created entity and interacts with Cut Loose in a strange way, or the captain, who is all about managing cohorts because they're on a ship, or the transformed, who doesn't have a vehicle but instead becomes a creature that can act on the same scale as vehicles.
I mean, I'll always play a game if you tell me that I could play a Decepticon. But like early Decepticons, when they were still saying "Rise Up" and not, what is it, terrorize, or but before the war crimes got fun. Ugh. I just listened to a little while ago to somebody do an actual play using Fellowship, and they were playing on Cybertron, and they got into just that mentality of these people who are not robots, they're people, have been at this war for 16 million years, and they don't die, and so they all know each other by their first names, and it's just a nightmare. But even the Decepticons were like, "Oh no, this bad guy? Oh, no, we gotta take this guy out. This is a nightmare. Hold on." Megatron lives, but this guy's not doing Megatron's thing. He's a bad guy. It was pretty wild. I don't know. I'll link that too if you feel like listening to it. But otherwise, I think that that about wraps it up here. We got a good chunk done.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone, I've been Insuling.
I'm Austin Ramsay, and you can find Beam Saber at tinyurl.com/BeamSaberKickstarter.
Go look it up. It's pretty great. And this is the PodPodGuestGuest signing off.